So today we're going to tackle a question that has confounded mankind for millennia. What happens when we give up the ghost down here on terra firma? When the heart expires, the brain stops receiving oxygen, and your friends start putting together a top 10 list of your favorite songs for your no doubt bleak funeral. Many people still believe that our time on earth is spent in some kind of vestibule to heaven, a kind of waiting room where we stay while the Almighty, like a divine accountant, gets out his calculator and starts subtracting all our sins from the good things we've done. You have to believe in the right him, of course, and so for centuries cultures have been calling out others as infidels or heretics. Heaven, they say, isn't open for all. Some names aren't on the guest list and they're not coming in. According to some people, heaven is big enough for all religions, and even in today's politically correct world, the eternal ethereal hotel in the clouds isn't exactly an inclusive joint. But there is more to afterlife theories than the precept of heaven, so let's now investigate. Let's start with the ancients, and we'll get around to what modern people, modern religions, and modern science say later. Many ancient Greeks believed that when they died, the soul separated from the body. They entered the underworld, where the main man in charge was called Hades. As you've seen in our episode on Hell, words like Hades and Tartarus, a place farther down than Hades, pop up in old texts of the Abrahamic religions. In Orphism, an ancient Greek religion, there was life after death. Graves had been uncovered with tablets in them that gave instructions for the dead when they entered the afterlife. The underworld was not easy to navigate, so the Greeks might have left some notes for the passed over person. But not all Greeks thought alike. The philosopher Plato was perhaps less superstitious and believed that we had a soul before we were born and we had one after we died. He once wrote that the trauma of birth makes us forget what we had learned in our past life. He called this anamnesis. He seemed to believe in an eternal spirit, but not exactly one that has to navigate beasts in the underworld. This dualism he talked about of soul and body would take root in many beliefs to come. Some scholars say for Plato, our soul is our true form, our true self. What you need to know is that ancient myths from the Greeks and other places around Europe, such as the ancient Germanic cultures, held the belief that there was some kind of underworld, and it wasn't a very nice place. Another assumption came later, and that was if there's a terrible place to be, there must be a nicer place, and that, as we know, wasn't down below but up in the sky. The Hotel Heaven, as we mentioned earlier. But then we had philosophical points of view that dealt with a life-death dualism, that inside us was spirit. This was based on reason more than crude superstition. Many of you today might still believe this. The belief that contained inside us is something else, and perhaps that's not connected to a collective spirit. Maybe it does not take human form, meaning it's not the diaphanous fella that turns up at the pearly gates to barter with St. Peter, nor the lucky soul that feasts on great food with his stock of pure women, but merely consciousness. That's why some people talk about this mainframe of thought, the collective unconscious, a kind of matrix, where we're all plugged in but don't always receive the signal from. The German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel believed this to some extent, that what he called absolute spirit could transcend death. He wrote that once we had become absolute spirit through a journey of self-discovery, we could understand infinity. Hegel is really confusing, but let's just say that in some religions he believed we could transcend this life. If you saw the recent Joe Rogan show with the always personable British particle physicist Brian Cox, Rogan brought up the matter that there might be a soul, perhaps connected to a great plexus of other souls. Cox countered, saying scientists would know if a soul existed, even as a thought, because they had incredibly sophisticated methods of measuring or just seeing energy. Everything in this universe has some kind of energy, and if we had a soul, argued Cox, we'd know. But if you're religious, you could just argue that God works in mysterious ways, and scientists are just brazen for thinking that they could detect this soul. That's an argument you can't win, because in religion you just have to take a leap of faith. Empirical truths might hold some weight with religious people, of course, but perhaps not when God and the afterlife are concerned. We must also remember that the men in the clouds with lustrous white beards is more of a whimsical version of life after death. And it's arguably superstitious when you consider the works of serious theologians. St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, for instance, argued that because humans can think of abstract ideas without actually needing to see things, basically, that we have imaginations, the mind didn't need the body. Like many before him, Aquinas believed the soul to be separate. He once said, "Soul is not the whole human being, but only part of one. My soul is not me." Aquinas was one of many Christian philosophers that attempted to reconcile more down-to-earth philosophy with religious beliefs. When the body died, something lived on, but that had nothing to do with men with pitchforks or angels playing harps. Now let's look at Buddhism. You've all heard of the concept of reincarnation, but it's often misunderstood as being a reward or punishment for something you did in this present life that affects what kind of creature you'll return as. Sometimes called metempsychosis, what this really means is not that you'll come back as a cockroach for cheating on your girlfriend, but that there are realms you can come back in as the same soul. That death is a cycle, and you can, with enough good karma, achieve nirvana, the end of the cycle. No more rebirth and therefore no more worldly pain. Someone might argue again that the soul does indeed exist as separate from the body, and when one body dies, this enters another cycle in another body, but the soul remains the same, just trying to achieve a state of nirvana. Another belief, perhaps similar, is eternal return, which can be found in the ancient Egyptian texts and also ancient Indian texts. Everything in the universe is cyclic, which includes your existence. That might also mean we are destined to live in the same exact existence again for eternity. If that's true, you should embrace your life. As philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, if some entity came to you in a dream and told you you would live this life over and over for all of eternity with all the pain and anguish as well as happiness, would you feel bad about it? Asked Nietzsche. It's not religion but a thought experiment. If this eternal reoccurrence were true, you should love life and all that happens. This could make you a better person, a happier person. Religion can also act as a positive thought experiment. If you believe it's a sin to cause others pain, and we all know pain, and that this can lead to not going to heaven, then perhaps you'll act better. We might also add that for some people, causing pain to others gets them into heaven, i.e. the Christian Crusades, religious extremism, countless fundamentalists today that have little respect for certain people's right to freedom. People disagree on what gives us good karma, what gets us silver stars from God, and this possesses a significant human problem and has done so for thousands of years. What we're trying to say is that the belief in an afterlife can perhaps be positive for you and the society in which you live and the world as a whole, but it might also lead to disharmony. Okay, enough religion. Brian Cox might tell you you don't have a soul, but he admits science doesn't fully understand how consciousness works. As a physicist, for him it's all about energy, and nothing to him shows that we have this extra piece of matter in our bodies that is a soul. But Cox also admits that atoms, what we are made of, can be confounding things. Do we really understand how the constituents of the atom interact? Perhaps the soul exists somewhere in subatomic particles. Cox admits that science can be a work in progress. He only says from what he knows right now, he doesn't believe in a soul. Religious folks might also ask, what came before the Big Bang in this universe-making particle? No one knows. Science admits this. While religions are often more stubborn and dogmatic, ironically, leapers of faith are often surer than scientists. Perhaps people should keep leaping in directions their entire lives. That's what science would say, but scientists can be stubborn at times too. Back to consciousness. We have certain physical properties that others have. This is the fleshy machinery of the brain and the chemicals that oil the many parts. But, and this is very important, we have us, meaning we have personality, we have character. Some might even say an aura. Some thinkers, serious thinkers, say the fact that there is this identity means we might have a soul. If the physical part dies, what happens to that special part that made us us? Then we're back to where is the energy that we might ask if this soul can only exist with the physical parts. Maybe we have a soul, but it dies. We are special, but not immortal. If you've ever heard the philosopher George Berkeley, namesake of the California University, you might know he was interested in what happens right after death. Did anything travel? Did we move on? It's said he once asked one of his students to hang him and take him down just after he started dying. Apparently, this experiment didn't do much except cause him lots of pain. But did you know that research in the USA said 18% of people brought back from death after a heart attack had a near-death experience? This, for some, is proof of life after death. While some scientists say we just go into a dream mode, others say the pineal gland releases a substance DMT at death. And if you've ever taken that stuff, you'll know fantastic, sometimes unexplainable things can happen. Science says our brains definitely work for a while after the heart stops, so something's going on. We don't think near-death trips are a good example of life after death. Others believe in the 21 grams theory, that after we die we lose 21 grams and maybe that was a soul exiting. Scientists disagree, however. Okay, so we have self, which is consciousness that we don't properly understand. We have a universe that we don't really know is infinite or not, or if there was anything before it. We are made up of bits of the physical universe, atoms from stars, and to some extent at a quantum level, we don't always know what's going on. We might go out on a limb here and say that if there is a soul, maybe it can only be found by understanding the engineering of this universe down to the smallest level. Maybe there is more to see. What haven't we seen? If we have a soul, maybe it's in the small print, and perhaps we just haven't been able to read that yet. This, of course, might not mean there is a god, a hell, an underworld, but it might explain how we are all different and yet part of the same thing, connected, perhaps in a way we don't yet know. That indeed we are all pure spirit of some kind. Perhaps even science will reconcile with religion in the future, but in ways we still can't fathom. Others might just call us temporary space trash made of carbon and proteins not connected nor eternally soulful. We will at least live on in some way in an atomical sense, so in some ways there's always some life after death, just not with an I involved. We can safely say we don't know, but we have enjoyed talking about it. You know what we're going to ask you. That is, what do you think about this? Tell us in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other show, What Happens When You Die. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.